So, welcome everyone to this special edition of Lotro Stream, kind of calling it a behind-the-scenes commentary track. For those of you unfamiliar with me, my name is Matt Elliott, scenario on the message boards. I am a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings Online. I've been working on Lord of the Rings on and off for almost 15 years now, and have had the fortune of being there when it started as Middle Earth Online, helping transition it over into Lord of the Rings Online, and seeing us through to where we are now. Wasn't here for Gondor and Mordor. Took a little break to go do some project management stuff, fun stuff, but came back and have been back and working on it since update 24. So purpose of this stream is to kind of just have a fun conversational hangout, give you guys a tour of what we're doing in update 29 as far as landscape goes, and just general talk and answer your questions. As was mentioned earlier, I'm a world designer. I can't answer your questions regarding things like systems, engineering, lag, any of that stuff. So if you have questions, and I'm sure you do, please try to keep them focused on world design, level design, what color we pick for flowers, those kinds of things, because those are where I'll be able to best help you. I can also talk about some things like world systems. World systems are things like day files, weather, scene files, monster spawns, where resource nodes spawns, even a little bit of housing stuff too. So welcome aboard. Update 29 introduces one of the a first really for Lord of the Rings, in that we're providing an update that has below cap content, and that area is the Wildwood. So the background of Wildwood was it had its inception in a little bit of an R&D project for myself. After we wrapped up our principal landscape development for Minas Morgul, I had a little bit of time in my schedule to kind of dedicate to some R&D and just to kind of flex some design muscles a little bit. And I wanted to use that time to try to build a space that, or see how quickly I could build out a space, and build a space that was maybe a little bit different than what we had done before. I remember from years ago when I was working on the first iterations of Breland and Shire that there was this chunk of space in between the Shire and Breland, and then ultimately Evendim as well, that was by and large undeveloped, and just seemed really ripe to take advantage of. Let's get things started. So many of you are familiar, probably all too familiar with Tressel Bridge, having taken your young characters through here. And for a very long time, Tressel Bridge had this locked off gateway. So as part of this update, we've blown that gate up. Well, not blown it up. This Tressel Bridge has seen enough hard times, but we've opened it up and kind of introduced a new section to the town and a new road out of the town. Those of you that jumped into Bullroar have already seen this, and you'll be able to see here many of the NPCs that are associated with the content in this space, at least for one of the two factions in the village, or in the region. Out of Tressel Bridge, we have the Woodcutters Brotherhood. On the other side of the area, we have the League of the Axe. So we'll take a pause here to look around things and take a look at some of the questions we have there. What is my favorite area of the game? There's a lot of places that I've had my hands on and that I've been able to help sculpt. Though honestly, it's hard to go wrong with the Shire, as much as that might sound like the easy answer. The Shire is just such a kind of calm and relaxing place, and I was really excited when we were doing Wells of Langflood, where we were able to kind of recapture the Shire a little bit with Lindleby. So Iwanar asks, curious why there are such large blocks of space left unused in the first place. There's still large gaps between many of the game areas. Well, that's because we only have so many people working on the game. I think everyone on the team would really love to kind of build out as much of the landscape as possible, but we only have so much time, and at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are telling a strong narrative, and if that means that certain areas don't get filled up, don't get designed and populated, then that's kind of the price we have to pay. So next up, Canwick asks, of all the possible future areas we could go, which area would you like to get your hands on creation most? The one sore spot that I have over my entire career working on Lord of the Rings, and something that I am teased about on occasion, is my deep desire to have the Tower Hills be completed. Right now, Ered Luin is kind of just sitting out there, not really connected to anything, and it would be great to be able to actually have it be connected and to be able to kind of further the story of Eriador with the inclusion of the Tower Hills. So Druidfire asks how long Wildwood has been an idea on the back burner before it was greenlit. And she remembers me saying no comment when it was asked around 2 years ago during a studio visit. So the Wildwood was something, like I had mentioned before, that I picked up as a side project after the completion of Minas Morgul. At the time, sorry, at the time I wanted to see how much time and effort it would take to build out a space like this, just from the world side of things, not necessarily including content and game systems associated with it, just to see how much time it could take. And once it was built, we didn't really have a home for it. We didn't have a place where we felt it could fit in with what we were doing, because we were trying to tell the story leading up to the Gates of Gundabad, and that kind of thing is very important to us, as we want to be able to tell our story and drive our story forward. And I knew that going into it. I had talked with our content designers about ideas that we could have for content in the space when we were ready to do something. And as luck would have it, fortunately, we had time in our schedule this year to actually build it, to actually make it a living, breathing, playable space. One of my favorite parts about it is all of the monster camps in the area are all they're all switch state, which is an internal term for basically they can change the loadout at intervals. So when you walk into an area like this, you see we have brigands populating this camp right now, but another person could come into this space, 10 hours from now, 5 hours from now, however long ago, and it could be populated with something completely different. It could be populated with orcs or half-orcs or goblins, and even some of the decorations in the space would change based off of which creature type is populating it. Also, there's always a chance if you clear the camp, it'll respawn as something different. So going back down through some of these questions, favorite area to work and design. I tend to find things that I really enjoy working on in every place that that I get a chance to touch. I think the Old Forest revamp was one of my favorite things to do, just because we had such great, more modern looking assets that we could go in and really help bring more atmosphere to that space that was already kind of oozing with atmosphere. If well received, so Dead XR3 Fiction asks, if well received, which he's not sure will be, can we see more areas like the Wildwood pop up in Eriador? I think it's something that they're certainly interested in the team in doing, but as I said before, like, we really want to make sure that we have the right time and the right space for anything like this when we do it. Let's see. So much chat to go through, you guys. Alright, so will you connect Gundapad through Angmar at some point? That is something that we have considered, but I don't have any specifics to provide at this point. It's certainly something on our radar and something that we would like to do, and it will be, when that connection happens, it will be a connection via a teleport, much like how getting into Moria is, and getting into the Vales of Anduin from the Misty Mountains is, for example. So speaking of Tower Hills, how different were the world designs of Mio and Lotro? So it's interesting because at the time when we were working on Mio and it was transitioning to Lotro, like it's effectively the same art and design teams, just changing the product over to a different style of game. I think there was a greater reliance on older world building techniques in Middle-earth Online, using more simplistic techniques that would allow us to build out landscape more quickly. It wouldn't necessarily allow us to get the kind of detail that we would want out of everything. So when it comes to designing, Obi in the Ocean asks, when it comes to designing alternate landscapes like Mordor Besieged and Flooded Isengard, how helpful is it to have those spaces already pre-built, in a sense? So most of the alternate spaces that we build are always meant to reflect a different period of time within that region. Sometimes the difference in time is very short. Hey, there's a Hjorn. Sometimes that difference in time is very short and leads to kind of nominal changes. Isengard flooded versus Isengard not flooded is not as drastic a change, whereas something like Mordor Besieged, happening in a very different era, those changes can be very drastic. I think one of the things that we learned from the experience of Mordor Besieged, and that we hoped that we corrected a little bit with the war zone of Elderslade, is people were really disappointed that Mordor Besieged didn't feel like it was at war. And with Elderslade, we actively, we took that feedback into consideration and actively tried to make sure that we were changing the landscape in the Warzone version enough to make it really feel like it was a changed space. So going down through these questions, if I don't answer your questions again, I apologize. There may be just things that I can't answer myself. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. I don't want to really talk about things that I don't have a specific overview on. And those questions may be better asked in a format like Cordovan's regular Lotro streams. Particularly this upcoming one. How does working remotely affect world development? So, working remotely has kind of definitely changed office interactions, and it required a good amount of fast and fancy work by our IT departments to get our hardware and software at a point where we could easily, work unhindered. Like I think we're very fortunate in that, the tools that we use to build Lord of the Rings Online really work almost as well connecting remotely as they do in person, and that credit totally goes to our IT people for working the magic that they've worked on, the network side of things at our office, and really, like, not having that work done would have made even what we've done in the past year just impossible to do. So next question is, can you comment on any strange Easter eggs off-map explorers have reported over the years? I'm thinking of the Hobbit dancing with a bunch of squirrels, that place between North Downs and Lonelands, for example. So some of this stuff that players have found over the years are kind of remnants of either old prototypes or developers just kind of like spending a little bit of time having fun themselves. The squirrel, for example, was a former world designer who just wanted to have a hobbit and a few squirrels dancing around each other. It was actually there are more Easter eggs hidden in the world than you are likely to know. When we were and looking at Evendim right now, for example, is a great instance of this. When we did some of the terrain polish that we brought to Evendim, some of it was kind of taking a look at and adjusting the textures on this beach, and we didn't know, but a designer had kind of hidden their signature in effectively invisible ink on that beach, using a different terrain texture type that was using the same artwork. So that threw me off. And that same designer also, if you look in Evendim, or not Evendim, Ered Luin, he has hidden on a tree somewhere in Ered Luin his initials and his then fiance's initials in a heart and on one of those trees. So there are lots of those little kinds of Easter eggs. The out of bounds stuff is, like I said, remnants of prototypes or versions of the game gone past. There are Hobbit villages out there that were used for some of the original E3 demos that were made for the game that were gone, or that were no longer accessible because of changes that we made to design. There was at one point a lot more prototype stuff happening around the entirety of the map, and as we approached launch, we kind of looked at what we were making for playable space and what we had as kind of like broken prototype stuff, and made the decision to try to delete some of the bigger, more complex prototypey spaces so that there weren't accidental exposures and bad things happening to characters. I on this test server, for example, just to kind of to further underscore how the dangers of unfinished spaces. I was trying to check out a space that we were developing for update 30 later this year, and accidentally broke my character while doing it, and had to do some shenanigans in order to unbreak him. So next up we have, hold on, Arbany asking, why did we choose to make this area dynamic and changing? We did that for the purpose of trying to make things a little bit more interesting here. Making it so that, the first time you come through the space, or even just if you start playing one day on a character and then play through it another day with a different character, your experience is going to be slightly different. It makes it feel like it's a little bit more living, a little bit more breathing. So when you come to, check out the mines, for example, there could be half-orcs out front, or there could be orcs. In today's case, we've got goblins. If you decide that you want to go hunting animals at some of the, hunting camps in the area, you can find bears or you can find boars, and it'll change. And this is really meant to be an extension of some of the things that we had in the game years ago. Some people might remember some camps in Breland itself where, sometimes it would be boars and sometimes it would be bears. And at the time, unfortunately, the content that was built to kind of support those areas didn't really take into account the randomness of those spaces. So often you'd have a quest that would be to like kill boars, but the state of the camp would be bears. So you couldn't complete the quest. With this space in mind, the spawns in this space support the content that's in this space. So you're not going to be waiting for a respawn or trying to like roll the right thing in the camp to get what you need to complete a quest. The quests work with this notion. Next question, do you see any chance that development goes south into Umbar or Hardwaith for some desert action? Certainly a place that we want to go. Again, it's something that we want to make sure that we have the right story to tell in those spaces. Right now, our story is eventually going to take us into Gundabad. We're kind of doing a little bit of an interlude here until we get there, because Elder Slade, very clearly left us at the gates to Gundabad, and we wanted to use this update as kind of a little bit of a palate cleanser for everyone. Something fresh, something a little different from what they've seen before, and something too to give players a reason to enjoy their lower level experiences again. So there was a question about frill heights and whatnot. I think frills, we are always trying to have a bit of a balancing act for it, and there is a piece of tech that I'm hoping to get at some point, which it's pretty low priority at the moment, so don't keep your fingers crossed too much for it, but that would help with some of the frill issues. I think in certain areas we have tried to use shorter frills where we can. Not to say that there isn't room for improvement, but it is something that we're aware of. I was, in fact, actually had a bug earlier today for one of the spaces in the Old Forest instance that needed its frills just trimmed down a little bit. So any plans whatsoever for Grey Havens in the close future? Probably not in the close future. I think one of the tricky things with a place like the Grey Havens is it really represents the conclusion of a number of characters' journeys. And there's still a lot that's going on in Middle-earth right now as far as the story is concerned. We have defeated Sauron, destroyed the ring. We just celebrated a wedding, but there's still a long road for our characters, both your player characters and our NPCs, to travel before we call it a day. And I honestly don't think any of us want to see that day called. Yao Deco asked if I'm the one responsible for the Hobbit and Squirrel. No, I'm not. Can't take credit for that. So Tower Hills and Grey Havens, were there any other zones in Mio that didn't make it? So there were certainly a lot of plans for the entirety of Eriador. I think our efforts became more focused on telling the epic story, and because of that led us away from a lot of other areas that would be nice and fun to see. But hopefully as we progress through, the Legacy of Durin and return to the epic story, and just kind of look at where we want to go beyond that, that there are opportunities for us to jump into some of those areas in the world. So Kurtrick asks if I'm aware of texture stretching on the top of the hill at Attack at Dawn skirmish. I was not aware of that, but please know that I'll add a note for myself on that. If you haven't filed a bug on it, as always, we're happy to have bugs, whether it's for landscape or for game system stuff. If you are filing bugs for landscape stuff, please make sure you include a /LOC string so that we know exactly where to go. Not everyone has worked on everything, so it can sometimes be hard to know exactly where an issue is occurring without that very specific positional data. All right. So the new lighting update is awesome from what I saw. Will there be other graphical improvements like that? So I think we've definitely got a lot of interest in adding more improvements to the game while also still trying to keep things performant. For right now, we're really focused on the attenuated lighting system. It's a huge thing for us. It's less apparent on landscape, but once you start getting into dungeon spaces and other interior spaces, which we'll go into one of the dungeon spaces for Wildwood soon, it's really much more apparent. One of the challenges that we had from a lighting perspective prior to this was, we have all of these gorgeous normal maps that a lot of our assets have, and it can be really hard to light them effectively considering the restrictions of the engine that the engine had previously. The great thing about the attenuated lighting system is now we don't need to use certain more expensive lights in order to get those normal maps to really pop out, which is great. There are some drawbacks to the system that, because we're a 15-year-old game and there's so much content, there may be places where the lighting doesn't feel quite right, because we had to do some other trickery to make lighting look good in the space at that time with that engine. We're building this game with you guys, and like I had mentioned before, anytime you see something like that looks like it might be off, particularly with the lighting system, make sure you let us know through a bug with the location so that we can go there and check it out, and make sure we fix it. So do you guys have to design and create each little section of the map, like every little turn and nook and rock, and the hill goes here, and let's put that tree there, etc.? So we kind of do a little bit of both higher level broad stroke designing. So we can take a grayscale image, for example, and use that as our height map. Use that as the foundations of our height map, and our engine will interpret a grayscale image to know where hills and valleys are. And then also use procedurally placed scene assets to help speed things along. So every tree that you see here is, every tree, every frill, those are procedurally placed. So we're not, driving ourselves crazy. The trick is figuring out the properties and the settings that we need to have in place in order to make something that feels, good, that feels natural. There's also a lot of, over the years, just lost knowledge that we've been trying to kind of reattain because, some people leave the company and some people move on to other projects, and, the kinds of things that they were doing, that information hasn't passed on to us, so we try to relearn it. Places like Vales of Anduin and Wells of Langflood are areas where I specifically spent a lot of time playing around with the scene file systems to try to get something that felt good and felt natural without requiring us to do a lot of hand placement. Things like terrain textures are all hand painted. And often you'll see in the distance with the rocks and whatnot, these larger rocks are things that are hand placed as well to kind of add a little bit of extra detail to the terrain. So what is personally for me the first step in designing a new region? So it really depends. Designing a new region for world design really depends on the kind of space it's going to be. For something like the Wildwood, which was really doesn't have a lot of story and lore attached to it, we're able to just kind of get in, start sculpting the terrain, start building the landscape, and try to kind of see where we have story overlap once we've got things going. For brand new whole cloth areas, places that haven't been touched by us yet, or aren't kind of in between adjacent to things, those usually start off with what we call a region personality, where our most focused lore people will take the idea for a region. So this is an example of this is what we had done for Vales of Anduin, Wells of Langflood, Elderslade, what we're currently doing as part of our Update 30 update, and what we've done for Gundabad as well, is we start by researching. We look at what's available for existing maps. The Fonstat Atlas is one of our major sources as far as knowing where things are likely to go on the landscape, as well as doing a deep dive into the entirety of the Tolkien canon. Even though there are pieces of the source that we can't use, we stick to Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, but being able to look at the other materials helps us have a bigger picture of the world at large, and a bigger picture of what the space could be, even if we can't reference some of the things that are in those spaces. So another question is to show off the new cave system in the Wildwood. We'll head over there in a little bit. I'm just doing a landscape tour right now. So there's a question, what are my thoughts on kind of reusing assets, even if it's just for the color scheme being out of place? I think there might be others that could find a bit immersion breaking. So there are certainly pros and cons to that conversation. One of the goals with the Wildwood was kind of meant to be a preview board for players that may not have experienced past Moria yet. So a lot of the things that you see in the Wildwood, creature types, are primarily creature types, but to some degree some of the deco and artwork in here as well, are things that they won't get to see until later on, but as kind of just a little teaser, a little taste. In regards to the buildings that were used in Copfast, for example, that kind of thing, those are really nice structures, and they're also not very specifically, they're not built with a very specific culture in mind. They're pretty straightforward crofters' houses, and we've used them in other places too. They've been, if you've done some searching in Angmar, you might have come across a crofter's stead somewhere in there as well. In regards to the ones being used here, certainly saw the feedback associated with that. And one of the things that I can actually show off as we run back towards that town is there is an appearance that has been applied to these buildings to make them fit more in with the Brie aesthetic. There are still aspects of them that have the original artwork, but there are parts too that bring in some of the Breland style, such as the roofs and the stone foundations. So we can kind of try to meet things halfway in that conversation. So let's pardon for the pause as I go through here again to read some more stuff. So, question from Professor Corey Olson: will you ever be able to go into Radagast's house in Rosgobel? He wants to get a better view of the tower with the birdhouses. Wouldn't rule it out. It's not something that is currently on our to-do list, but certainly something that if we had the time or the need to go there, we would go there. So there's a question kind of about the underlevel aggro ping in areas. That was put in place a long time ago in order to help prevent some exploitive behavior that was occurring at the time. Don't know what I can say necessarily to address the question, desire, or concern relating to it right now, but just explaining that there was a reason for it going in. Because of some of the degenerative gameplay that was coming out of it. Druid's Fire says to watch out for wandering elites. Well, fortunately, I am running around on a level 130 character and don't have to worry about that. Question: will Lotro be around in 20 years? Hopefully, maybe. Who knows what the future holds. I think we're certainly not planning on it going anywhere for the foreseeable future. So when building hold on. Let's see if I can run into a tree. When building landscape, what is the interaction like with art and animation team? Do you ever feel constrained by limitations of how long it takes for new art to be produced? So one of my favorite things to say whenever I'm talking to anyone about the concepts and ideals behind project management or production is that restrictions breed creativity, whether that's time or available resources. I think there's certainly a benefit to not being able to get everything we want, because it allows us to better think about what we really need for a space. We have such a large library now after so many years that we can, particularly for building landscapes, we can get a lot of what we want and need done using what we have, and maybe asking for certain things to be polished and cleaned up. Not to say that we don't want to ask for things. We just know that everyone's time is precious, and certainly there are going to be times when we need more art support for an area than others. Oh, by the way, as a indication of how camps are changing, we were here maybe 15 minutes ago, and these were goblins. Now it's all orcs. So it changes. Awesome that it works. I'm so glad that it works. So before I dive in, I'm doing a quick look down through some more of these questions. So who starts the instant design process? Do landscape devs sketch out the area, or do content devs come up with their mechanics and get landscape to match? So it's a very collaborative process. It really depends, again, on the needs for the space. Sometimes the instance designer will have a high-level idea for what they want, and they will put a rough map together showing how they want the layout of the space to work, and then kind of leave it up to the world designers to do it, to build it out. Other times an instance designer may be like, I just need it to take 10 minutes to get from point A to point B, and there needs to be this thing here, and this is the high level themes of the space. So it's going to be a fight with orcs in the city, or it's going to be a spider cave. And then they kind of just let us go from there. Often there's a lot of checking in, a lot of back and forth, saying, okay, so take a look at the space now, see how long it takes you to get here. Does this work for you? You know, that kind of thing. Druidfire says that the Midsummer Minas Tirith was amazing with world building and Bill's music. I cannot say enough good things about Bill's music. He has done some very fantastic stuff for Lord of the Rings, and it is easily some of the best music that I've heard, both in this game and just in general. He deserves every award he can get for this. For his work. So talk a little bit about the per pixel lighting attenuation. Well, this is actually a great spot to talk about it. So per pixel lighting attenuation is basically taking our old system, which was a vertex-based lighting model, where light influences lit polygons based off of where their vertices were, and is making it a pixel-based system, which basically allows lights to have a much greater coverage and a more accurate reflection of the volumes that they comprise. On top of that, the system also makes it so that lights can cause normal map effects to pop. Whereas the old system, you needed a very specific kind of light for that to work. So we will per pixel lighting. It's graphics. There we go. So we have per pixel lighting attenuation. This space might be a great place to show it off. There are certainly other better spaces for it. So as you can see, just by toggling it on and off here, we're getting better influence on some of these structures, and that's because, instead of looking for the vertices to light based off of, it's looking at the actual pixels that the influence would hit. See if I can find a good spot to show off the normal maps. So you can see here, we've kind of got these details. You can see normal map details on this rock, but they flatten out when it's turned off. That's one of the biggest wins of this system. There may be some assets that you see that look a little funky because of this, and again, totally encourage you to file a bug report should you see those outliers. All right, so next question is, can you give us non-programmer types a quick simple crash course on the process of world building? So world building kind of comprises a bunch of different things for us here on Lord of the Rings. It is the high-level physical sculpting and design of a space, what it looks like, taking the building blocks of things like plants, rocks, trees, bushes, what the sky looks like. It's taking those building blocks and pulling them all together into a single cohesive thing. I often, I explain to my grandmother that I'm a landscaper in a digital space. And I think that's probably one of the most effective ways to explain what it is that we do. Like, everyone kind of understands what a landscaper is and what a landscaper does. We don't necessarily grow the trees, though sometimes I do, but I'm responsible for placing them in such a way that they look good. How often is concept art created before developing an environment? Often concept art is created for specific points of interest. So if there is a major city, a major tower, something that's very specifically called out in lore, we want to try to get concept art for it. When working on an area full, like from just starting it out blank slate, if we don't have a specific POI that we need, we will often go to photo reference for it. We'll take a look at what is out there existing in the world, the kinds of caves that are out there, the kinds of landscapes that are out there. We did that for Moria. One of the things that we did to prepare for Moria was there was a great National Geographic documentary series that was all about caves. So we, for several weeks, had like our Friday afternoon, documentary watching sessions where we would sit down and we'd, have some drinks and we'd watch the National Geographic documentaries to kind of wrap our heads around what cave systems can look like. What is the most surprising? Hold on. Things keep scrolling on me. So there was a question about the most surprising or humorous landscape bug that I've ever come across. There was one time where there was a monster behavior that was being played with that was untargeted, and it was a troll that was throwing boulders, and I dodged the boulder, and the boulder hit a deer, and the deer attacked the troll and actually beat the troll. Don't know how it happened, but I sat there and watched it happen for 15 minutes, and it was amazing. What kind of level design advice would I give to junior designers, junior level designers? I would say your goal as a designer is to balance performance with fun. You want to make sure that the space you are building is something that is enjoyable and appealing, but you don't want it to be something that is frustrating to get through. And it's me saying this, I'm sure has a little bit of bemusement for some of you, because some of the spaces that we've built, are not the most enjoyable spaces to work your way through. And it's something that's definitely a learning experience for us all as we proceed in the game, and we try new things and they may not work out. Trying stuff is definitely also very important. Seeing if you can make something work in as non-destructive a way as possible. And say, when you play as you're creating a new landscape, do you run with ambient lighting maxed out? I do, and notice when I turn it to game default, things become so dark with so many details missing, wall textures, etc. So we do not play with ambient light settings set to default, because we don't want to assume that is the default that everyone is running on. We usually play, I personally don't design with any sort of ambience set. Sometimes there is a full bright light toggle that I will turn on in order to see what I'm working on. But by and large, we tailor lighting for what feels like it is good for the space. The ambient lighting model is meant, or the ambient lighting slider is meant to try to help people help account for differences in environments, differences in video cards, differences in your own lighting situations right around you, as well as differences in your monitors, because monitors play such a huge part in how well lighting is. That's why a lot of games, when you go to play them, they start off the game, particularly horror-based games, start off your gameplay experience by having you adjust a gamma slider until you can see certain things. The monitors are one of the things that we can't account for. They're one of the things that we hope everyone has a great monitor, but we can't expect everyone has that. Are there any regions that I would like to totally redo if I had the time and resources? And could we get more forest shell work, more stable points, camps, etc.? So I personally don't have any any areas that I would want to completely redo. I think there are certainly some spots that would benefit from, you know, a little bit of extra cleanup here and there, but overall, I don't have anything that I really would want to just like burn down and start from scratch on. As far as stables and whatnot goes, like that is something that, as I have time, I would really like to, you know, dig into and try to improve as much as I can. And I think I just came up the way that I went down. You know, getting lost in my own dungeon. Here, let me give myself a map. Stable routes are certainly something that I'd love to take a stab at, because those are one of those things where, at least as far as area door is concerned, they were built at a time when a very different kind of gameplay mentality, both within the team and just for MMOs in general, existed. You know, kind of the thought and idea that like travel should mean something, and the journey does mean something. The journey definitely means something. That's part of why too we have the slow travel routes still supported everywhere, because there's something just great about being able to, you know, to go your own way at your own pace and explore. But I certainly think that there is space for us to add more stable routes, clean up routes, revise things, and maybe overall just kind of holistically look at how travel is handled and how we can both simplify and improve the system. So we're getting close to being out of time. Why is Spider-Man in the back? So I've got several Spider-Mans going on right now. I've got my Candy Dish Spider-Man. I've got a great piece of artwork that a friend of mine made that is a Spider-Man made out of spider-shaped ink splotches. And I have a Spider-Man chair cape, even though I know Spider-Man having a cape is apocryphal. It's a chair cape that my wife got me. So Spider-Man is a major superhero influence on my life. Is the camps changing a global thing? All players see the same mobs, or is it a per player thing client side? It is a global thing. So if there are several players in, for example, this part of the West Delph, and they manage to clear out all of the half-orcs in here, when it respawns, there's a chance that it will be a completely different spawn loadout of different monsters. It's the same for everyone, so it's not per client. I feel like that kind of helps sell it as a living world that changes. So I know there's a lot of 4K questions. I can't answer those 4K questions for you, unfortunately. Those are very engineer-related things that, while there's certainly an art component to it, is also something that I don't really touch all that much. Housing has seen major improvement over the last few years. Rohan housing has been very well received. What would you like to do with housing next? Well, I would like to do more housing. And it is something that I have been kind of thinking about and making some plans for. I don't have anything specific to announce or say beyond, yes, we want to do more housing, and whatever we do next, it will likely be elf, hobbit, or dwarf, one of those three. We're not going to do another human-based housing neighborhood next, because we have plenty of those. Has there been discussion about level scaling? Again, that's a game systems thing. It was actually an idea that I wanted to push for the Wildwood, actually, but the level scaling system that's used in Ettenmoors isn't really ideal for what we would want to do here, and there were a lot of open questions about how coming into a space that is level scaling would interact with the player as opposed to teleporting into the space like you do in the Attenuation. I think part of why the Attenuation, works as it does is because there's a very clear entry point that you go into, whereas a place like this you would be potentially crossing back and forth, and we don't know how that would work. Be filled in South. So, as I've said before, there are plenty of places in the world that we would love to get to. There's all of this down here that would be great to fill in sometime. We've got all of Linden that would be great to fill in. There is no shortage of landscape for us. It's all a matter of time and opportunity. And hopefully we have the time, and hopefully we have the opportunity. More of an artistic question. When working on world building, do you listen to music? If so, what? Yes, I usually have some sort of soundtrack running. It really has changed over the years. I have very clear memories of when I was building Arid Lewin, listening to Breaking Benjamin and Chevelle a lot. Currently, my mix is a lot of 311, Dirty Heads, and 21 Pilots, as well as my daughter's various soundtracks bleeding into my ears as she sometimes hangs out in here with me while I'm working. She has her own little desk over there that she likes to draw at. When is the new update coming? We have not announced a specific release date for the update yet, though we do have our next Boror due out soon. And hopefully there will be some updates and changes to what you saw from the first one to kind of indicate progress. See if I can find a nice scenic view to kind of sit down at and enjoy while we finish off the rest of these questions. We made it through a whole day cycle, since I'm running running out of time here. Let's see. When is Nip coming out? Answered that. So the starter area maps did change. So we changed the Breland Shire and Arid Lewin top level maps. Any of those inset maps, like the Thorns Hall map, Archit, and whatnot, those didn't receive updates. This was largely done as an attempt to test and see how we can make the map more usable. While the original style of the maps are great, they aren't necessarily great at helping you find things on landscape, helping you find landmarks, because those are very open to kind of the artist's interpretation of things. And I think as the game has grown, again, it's a change in mentality of, the maps were a product of, the thought processes on how people use maps at the time. And as the game has grown and as gamers in general have gotten a bit more sophisticated, their wants out of the maps have gotten a little bit more sophisticated. Now, I know that those old school maps, there are many people that kind of lament them going away, and there may be opportunities in the future for us to introduce systems that allow you to kind of toggle between and pick and choose different versions of the map, which would be great. And it's certainly something that we've talked about, but not something that we have specifically on any radars right now. Let's see. How does landscape design interact with content design? Does content ask for things that need to help tell the story, or does its story evolve from what landscape is provided? How much do you consider the story content when designing? So we usually work very close in tandem. We are responsible, world designers are responsible for the physical aspects of the area, where the roads are, where the rivers are, where the towns are, and those are usually informed by some research. Sometimes there will be needs that content has, like, oh, hey, the story I'm telling, it would be really cool if we could have these runes here or this there. And if there's space for it, we try to accommodate that, or we work with the designer at determining a good alternative. Maybe this ruin doesn't really work right here, but there's this better hill for it to be on, kind of thing. Usually what I find myself often doing is, we'll get a release up to the point where it's just about ready to go to Bull Roar, and I'll earmark a day or so for myself to go through and play the content in the space and make sure that what content wants to do in the space is well supported by what we've built on the landscape. Make sure that, if there are quests to kill monsters, that maybe we see this quest is only relying on the mixed spawns, which isn't how we would like things to be. So if we say, this is requiring you to kill boars, but there are no boar camps, so maybe we put together some small boar camps to go along with this. So it's very collaborative, and I think, honestly, I think to some degree the pandemic has forced us to be even more collaborative than we were before, because we don't have that opportunity to kind of stand up over a wall and talk to people. Will there ever be? Will Thornley's worksite ever get finished? Maybe. I think there are some parts of what we've done in Tressel Bridge that will be appealing to those who have a fondness for Thornley's worksite. So I'll leave that right there. Yes, we get a lot of mileage out of spiders. So why are Iron Hills so close to Erebor while it should be more space in between? A lot of that is just the balancing of landscape, space, and travel time. I think if we were to build a world that was realistically proportioned to how the maps are, there would be a lot of dead time running through a region. As it is, we have a very large landscape. The worlds that we built are very big, but we always need to be careful about making it too big, because that's one of the fatiguing parts of gaming, is if you have to run through the same area over and over and over again, and it's such a long haul. Even sometimes, as a new player playing in Combe and having to do the trek between Combe and the lumber mill and the brigand camps and back and forth, that's a lot of time investment on the player's part, and it can drag. So we often make decisions about the scale of spaces, thinking how much time it's going to take a player to run across there, and kind of what the threshold for frustration is with that. So I'm going to try to get through a couple more questions, and then I should wrap up the talk. It's been great. Thank you guys for asking your questions and for enjoying this tour of the Wildwoods. Certainly I enjoyed it myself, and maybe in the future we can do other regions as well, and run through some of the other areas that are already in game and kind of do a commentary track behind them. Will docks be added in any of the areas in the game? So for context on that, as kind of a lead up to the Wildwood, the Brandywine River now has a dock network starting starting basically at the Buckleberry Ferry and going all the way up to Tinadir, as well as the Trader's Wharf and and the spots in Evendim, off Lake Evendim. This was something I put together as kind of a learning experience for me, to learn how to do the scripting and UI that I needed to do to make new overhead icons show up, and it felt like this would be a nice little tease. And it's definitely something that I'm interested in doing for other major rivers throughout the game, particularly the Anduin River, which is the biggest, longest, most storied river of the game thus far. Have we ever considered different mounts? Well, so we got the boar mounts, which is something that I've been lobbying for a long time. As far as other types of mounts go, that's not really my purview. Outside of suggesting things, I do have a couple ideas that I would love to have turned into mounts, but that's a battle for me to have with our game systems and art teams. And let's see. Someone wants to explore Ruin and Harad, and I definitely think that's a place that we would love to go to. Again, time and opportunity will tell. Will we ever get 500% speed mounts? I would say that's probably a hard no, given the way that our landscape loads and how it loads over time. Something that fast just would not make the landscape happy and would not make player perf happy. Any new plans to bring PvMP to new or expanded areas? No comment on that, though. Fantas has been, doing some work on PvMP stuff, as well as some other members of our systems team to kind of help balance that out. Again, nothing I can speak specifically to, just knowing that the work is there. What world builder do you use for Lotro? Well, it's actually called World Builder, but it's a proprietary tool that was developed and used. The very first version of it was used for a game called Asheron's Call, which was my first MMO love, and versions of that over the years have been used to create, Asheron's Call 2, DDO, and now Lotro. So yeah, I think that that does it for me. Thank you everyone for attending and for asking all of your great questions. I hope you enjoyed this kind of leisurely stroll through the Wildwood. This is our upcoming area for update 29. And hope that you all enjoy it and you are able to, bring characters in that are that are lower level, that are looking for something new and exciting for them to do, or bringing your high level characters in to participate in the missions and instances that are coming with this update. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you Cordovan for holding my hand through getting the stream set up. And we'll see you all on Bull Roar and on the live worlds coming soon. Thank you and have a good afternoon.